Well, welcome to the Tennis Parents Community, a group of over 2,300 parents of junior players training in the GB system who have joined the group to support and share with one another, and also to make informed choices about how they can best support their own child through their journey in the sport. If you're listening to this recording and you're a parent based in Great Britain, if you're not already a member of the group, do have a look for us on Facebook. We also have a presence on Instagram, and we have a YouTube channel, which is also open to coaches, officials, and international parents. Just have a look online and search for the Tennis Parents Community. Now, the LTA CEO, Scott Lloyd, has said that nothing is more important to us than the safety and well-being of those taking part in our sport. And this evening, I'm really pleased to welcome LTA Head of Safeguarding, David Humphrey, and LTA Safeguarding Case Manager, Greg Pople, who are going to share their knowledge and answer parents' questions about keeping their children safe in tennis. After a tennis coach was sentenced for child sex offences in 2017, the LTA carried out what they called a root and branch review, and they launched a new safeguarding strategy, which was led by a team of experts and headed up by David, former Met Police Detective Chief Inspector. And then Greg joined the team in 2018, bringing his own extensive experience with child safeguarding as a senior police officer. By 2022, they'd won an award from the Safeguarding and Child Protection Association for their outstanding contribution to safeguarding. So, David and Greg, you're very welcome to the Tennis Parents Community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
No, thank you. We do appreciate you joining us. And obviously, these guys are giving up their time. We don't pay anybody to come on this Q&A. And we really appreciate you giving up your time to talk to us tonight. Perhaps we could start by just asking you both, maybe first of all, David, tell us a little bit about your childhood in sport and how your parents supported you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. David Humphrey, Head of Safeguarding and Integrity for the LTA. I played football competitively when I was younger, as well as kind of martial arts, golf, tennis, cricket, socially as a child. So quite a bit. How did my parents support me? Well, the usual, I suppose. I'm very familiar with parents on this group, running me around to various events, standing on cold touch lines in the mud, clapping me along. I wasn't the best player at football, so often I wouldn't be selected. But then on a Sunday morning, you might find that a number of players have pulled out of the team. And then I'd get a phone call from the coach asking if I could attend, and then cue my dad getting shouted at to get out of bed and get me to a pitch in the middle of Kent somewhere. So I'm sure that'll be a familiar story for those on this group, but that's my kind of brief background. Nothing too spectacular, I'm afraid, though.
Oh, that's cool. I mean, football, obviously, with great transferable skills for tennis as well. And interesting that you're from Kent then originally, are you? Is that where you're?
That's right. Yeah. I grew up in Petswood, Orpington, which is kind of Kent border, and then moved towards West Malling, Aylesford, near Maidstone, for those who know it.
Great. I'm sure there'll be plenty listening who will. And Greg, how about yourself?
Another Kent representative here. I grew up in the 70s, giving my age away a little there. And I think it's fair to say, from my experience, there wasn't really any parental support because and if anyone disagrees, please jump in. But my opinion is that back in sort of the 70s, it was much more relaxed and children were just left to do what they want to do. And I was actually at county level at athletics, but my parents just didn't get involved in it. And we see now that there's much more pressure and expectation on young people and children in sport and academia. So that's something that I'm really mindful of. But really, with my experiences, I've been a athletics and a football coach and a referee in football in the past. Sorry to say there's no tennis in there. It's just something that I didn't grow up with in my family. And I think I've seen both the good and bad side of parenting throughout those roles as a coach. And I think it just helps me understand just how important it is for the role that parents play. And I think just taking it away from me very briefly, if you wouldn't mind, I deliver training on behalf of NSPCC, and there's 6 core principles around safeguarding, and they all start with a P. I won't go into all of them, but one of the top 2 is parental responsibility. And I think sometimes society loses sight of the fact that there is an expectation on parents to look after and enable their children to thrive. And so we see those benefits in sport, but equally we see it when it doesn't go quite right, and that's where we have to become involved.
No, I like you also grew up playing sport in the 70s, and definitely it was more of a job of the PE teacher at school, and especially coming from a family of 4 children, all doing different activities, and 2 parents that worked. Every family is a different dynamic, right? And the term support is always different. But particularly in tennis, I think parents have a very different role to play. There's so much more that they can get involved in, and that's really why being a parent in tennis is something that we sort of talk about in great depth, because there's so many different facets to it. So David, tell us how you came to, how your career led you to the position you take in the LTA now.
Yep. So I was a police officer for 15 years. Kind of worked my way through the ranks, primarily within safeguarding and domestic abuse. And that kind of piqued my interest in safeguarding. I then was seconded to, at the time, Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary to inspect social care and police forces nationally on their safeguarding arrangements. So a number of those reports would have made the national press. Probably people on this call would have seen them in the news. And I really enjoyed that. And once that completed, that kind of 2-year secondment, I thought it was time for a new challenge. So I thought it'd be nice when this role came up to combine my kind of safeguarding background with love for sport. So that's what led me to be where I am right now.
It sounds like the LTA are pretty lucky to have you with such a good credentials there. How about you?
Great place to work.
Yeah, no, for sure. And Greg?
Yeah, I just followed Dave really. If we put that funny, but I was 30 years service in policing. My last 20 years of those 30 were as a senior officer in both child protection and public protection work, which led me to everything from both operational as a senior investigating officer with child murders, from strategic work and introducing things like MASH hubs and child sexual exploitation into the Met Police from good practice from elsewhere. So I bring a very strong blend of both strategic and operational, and retired and thought I'd slow down a little. So brought into the world of sport because it's very different. And it was purely because after speaking with Dave, I saw just how tennis was a trailblazer for safeguarding in the sport, and just knew that it wasn't just the skills that I could bring, but it was more about what it was doing around the sport and safeguarding, whereas a lot of others weren't at the time. So that's what whet my appetite, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, an organisation taking this seriously is a great place to be, isn't it? Clearly, I think to be able to make such a big difference is always very enticing, even in retirement. I know that feeling.
Yeah, slowing down hasn't quite worked out how I thought, I must admit.
Well, what else would we be doing, hey?
Yeah, exactly.
So perhaps obviously the parents, some of the parents on the group, some of the parents on the call tonight have put forward questions to ask you, but they, as usual, they prefer me to ask them. It's interesting, that dynamic, and as to know why perhaps parents aren't keen to ask questions. I know from my point of view, when I was bringing up tennis players, I felt that might prejudice them somehow in terms of what questions I asked. I might be seen as some people say in the group, that parent that makes a problem where there isn't one, and so forth, which is obviously a bit of a red flag for safeguarding. So I'm really pleased to be able to represent the parents this evening. But if anybody on the call wants to put anything in the chat, if they want to message me privately, or if they want to put up a hand and speak, they're very welcome. But I'm going to crack on with some questions that have been put in. So I think it's sensible to start, first of all, to ask the question, what is safeguarding? Can you explain what you mean by that? Because I know sometimes there's a confusion between what's safeguarding, what's code of conduct, and there's also confusion about what sort of types of child abuse we're talking about when we say the word safeguarding. So what sort of issues and concerns come under safeguarding, and why is that important in tennis particularly?
Yeah, great. And let me say, great question. And I know there's a lot of really good questions, Kay, and parents out there. So thank you. I'll jump in with that. What you'll find is we'll share our responses, because there's some things that I'm closer to as the case manager, dealing with so many allegations, and then some things that Dave's got a greater continuity and knowledge on strategic. So I think I'll jump in here, but Dave, obviously, feel free to jump in as well. But I think you heard me when I just talked about the parental responsibility and the 6 Ps. I don't just focus within tennis. So, for example, safeguarding, we take a lot of our learning and expertise from, and some of the people on this call might know if they're in roles such as education, for example, or statutory agencies. But safeguarding is across working together to safeguard children guidance from the government is far wider than just child protection, as we know. It's about preventing children from becoming victims of abuse, and young people and adults at risk, of course, and ensuring that there are opportunities for children to thrive in society. So I think it's really key to break down our team. There's 2 parts to our team. We're one whole team, but you've got the case team, which is myself and 2 case officers, and we deal with allegations of child abuse and concerns. And if I could just park that and come back to that briefly, Kay, but the other part of the team is the wider safeguarding piece, which Dave will also probably chip in on that as well. And that is where, under Matt Lee as our safeguarding manager and our 5 regional safeguarding officers, we do an awful lot of strategic and preventative work, both with safeguarding standards at venues and with coaches and deployment principles, and lots of strategic work around competitions and initiatives. I know, Kay, that you and some other people on the call might be aware of our Young Persons Welfare Ambassadors, for example, and our conference that's coming up in October, where I did need to remind you that we are plugging this community group on that conference, because I know
Thank you for that, yes.
And Dave's been leading on doing that. So there is the safeguarding wider holistic piece around preventing children from becoming a risk of harm. But then unfortunately, it's a bit more of the unfortunate side, there's the child protection work. And that brings us up to the question that you just asked about what is child abuse and what is codes of conduct. So what we first do, and I know I'll probably come up and touch on this more in some more questions, but just to elaborate slightly, what I want to do is make it clear that if you have a safeguarding concern, you report it. Please don't think out there that it has to be an allegation of abuse of a child to report it. The concern word means if you have a concern about a child, and we often talk about what's called a gut feeling, Kay. If you've got a gut feeling that something's not right, you report it to us, and I can go into the details a bit later as to how you would report that if people don't know. Now, what we then do is assess whether it is a concern that is around matters that are either a low-level case that could be either managed by a club or a venue or a county, or if there's just a breach of standards, for example, where there's an improvement in practices, or sadly, when it becomes an allegation of abuse. Now, child abuse, without going too deep, can be a whole range of things. There's about 12 different things, but they come under the main headings of physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and neglect. And I'll touch a bit later, if that's okay, on the sort of things we're seeing as trends. So if we see it as an abuse matter, that's something that needs investigating, and without getting too technical, we call that prohibited conduct under our disciplinary code. And what that basically means is if somebody is a risk of harm to children, or has already done something, or is likely to be a risk of harm, we would then pick up a formal investigation, providing that's what a victim and witnesses would like us to do, which could take us all the way up to a formal hearing and investigation with quite stringent outcomes, such as suspension or warnings or mentoring, for example. There are a whole host of other parts.
Can I just ask a little question within that? No, just to clarify, we're talking about all of the audiences in tennis, aren't we? Not just, say, a coach, for example, or an official.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Kay. You're one step ahead of me. I tend to bring them up later, but yeah. So just to give you an example, a majority of allegations are against coaches, but please don't think that that's a negative thing. It's because the nature of the business is coaches are close to children. Then there are allegations against parents, is the next strongest allegation, I'm sad to say, but that can also be in events and incidents that happen outside of tennis, of which a great coach picks up on when a child makes a disclosure, like they would at a school, for example. And then we have allegations against members, tennis members, adults, children, child-on-child allegations, and also spectators at events as well. So there's a whole broad range. But predominantly most are around those who are directly linked with the children themselves. So yeah, we would investigate the serious level prohibited conduct matters, but then also we would provide advice and guidance to venues or counties if it was a much lower level matter that could be managed without it being a formal investigation. I think just to touch on one tiny piece on that without eating too much time there, Kay, is that in addition to that, I know you mentioned around codes of conduct, for example. Well, yes, I mean, a lot of things that people do when we investigate them for prohibited conduct, which is a risk of harm to children, is also a breach of codes of conduct. But if there is that risk of harm and it's towards a child, then of course we would investigate that. If it's between adults, an adult on against an adult victim, and it's not an adult at risk as per the definition of the Care Act, somebody who's in need of support and services from local authorities, for example, then that would be a straightforward code of conduct matter for our LTA disciplinary team, who we work very closely with on linked cases. So we do focus on cases against children, and there are some nuances at competitions, but I might save that because I think there's a lot more to talk about competitions in a little while, if that's all right.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's interesting. I mean, a parent has asked one question tonight about the rules of playing in wet conditions and the fact that tournaments might be carried out in heavy rain and whether that's safe or not. Is that the sort of thing you expect to get reports on, or does that should be channeled somewhere else?
Yeah, I've got to watch how I say it because it can upset some people, because some people could say, you could rightly look at it and say, well, if my child's at risk of slipping over and hurting themselves, it's a safeguarding issue because you're not protecting our child. But as you hear, when we're talking about safeguarding, it's around protecting children from abuse. So this would be a procedural matter. And first and foremost, let me be clear, is that a competition, if it was a properly organised competition with a referee or an official, they would assess the state of courts, whether it's just wet conditions, poor conditions, icy or too hot, for example. They would assess the state of the courts to make a decision on whether it's safe to play. Yeah, obviously, if it's not an officially run one, then you would expect the same level of, I hate to use the term common sense, but somebody running it at a local event to say, you know, is this ridiculously bad weather? Am I slipping if I'm testing it? If it is, we shouldn't be playing. So if there is ever a concern that somebody feels that their child has played in conditions that are poor, whilst I don't want to discourage anyone from contacting safeguarding team, that would be a very clear query through to our customer support team, who could answer that because they link in with the competitions and officiating team about decisions. But yet, we do see an awful lot of matters reported to the safeguarding team with, sorry to sound provocative, but quite tenuous links to safeguarding, which, without sounding wrong, can obviously detract us from focusing on the core higher risk issues. So yeah, I would suggest on a subject matter like that to go through the customer support team, because we're around trying to protect children from abuse, for example.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because everybody's appetite for risk in life generally is different, isn't it?
Yeah, and safeguarding's become such a huge word over the last decades. It really is. Everything is linked to safeguarding.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Really interesting to sort of break that down and understand a bit more about risk assessments, health and safety versus safeguarding. But one of the things that was mentioned there was that if you feel a child is at risk, you should definitely do something about that. So could you, one of you answer, please, a question around that? What should someone do if they believe that there is a child at risk? What choices have they got?
Sure. I think I'm not stealing Dave's limelight here, but I think because this is my core business, I might as well come in on that, because some of you on the call may have even engaged with me on matters of this before. So for example, having been the case manager in the last 3 years, I see all cases coming in and all concerns each year. So there's great continuity with me and my case team of the type of things we see with trends and how to deal with them properly. So the first thing I want to say is report it. Simple as that. You know, what we want to do is say, you heard me say earlier, is we talk about gut feelings. And if you've had training on safeguarding elsewhere with NSPCC or otherwise, you'll hear the same type of messaging. We have a gut feeling, and we haven't got time to go into stages that I could do in our case study groups that we do in things like conferences and sessions. But what we tend to see sometimes is people have a gut feeling, but they just don't want to report it because they think maybe it's not quite what I think, and so I don't want to ruin someone's life, for example. So they leave it, and then unfortunately it's allowed to grow, and then a child becomes a victim of something later on. So if you've got a gut feeling about something, however small you feel it is, report it to us through the safeguarding link or the safeguarding mailbox if you can't find the link. Because one thing that you won't realize is you're a small part of a very big jigsaw. So whilst you may only be seeing that small part, until you report it to us and we're able to check wider, and an awful lot of the time check with statutory agencies such as Children's Services and Police, we then sometimes can get a bigger picture, but also can discount the concern as well. So if in doubt, report it, first of all, on our case management system, however minor you think that is. Now, we would assess that at that point. And that is when if you're unlucky enough to have to report it, you'll see there's a brief on there explaining in far less words than I use, as to why we take the concerns, what a concern is, that we would then assess for an investigation or may determine it's a lower level concern that could require local or county advice, for example. But yeah, if in doubt, report it. And one very final point I'll just make, is you're never alone. So whether you're a parent or a welfare officer, if it's out of hours, if it's a weekend and you don't think it's an emergency and you can't call police because you don't think it's an emergency, well, I'm afraid to say we don't work weekends because we're not an emergency service. Oh, hello, Kat. You're never alone. So you can always call as a last resort the NSPCC helpline, which is a 24-hour helpline service where they can advise you whether you've got a concern or not. And they also advise you what to do, how to report it. And then they'd also send a report through to the governing body or any other agency through writing for the next working day as well.
So if you very concerned that a child was in immediate danger, you wouldn't send an email in and wait for an answer on Monday morning or something. If
you thought it was immediate danger, that would come under the term emergency, and you would be perfectly within your rights to contact emergency services, police, for example. Some people are very scared to contact police because they don't want to bother them, but you'll soon know if they would treat it as an emergency or not. So please don't sit on something if you think it's an emergency.
And what about if someone, sorry, carry on.
Anonymous, were you going to say anonymous?
Yes, I was going to say exactly that.
We're reading it, we're reading each other's minds, Kay. So, so equally, if you're concerned as somebody, whether you're a parent or a volunteer or anybody in the sport, and you want to report something, but you would like to remain anonymous, you can. Now, the key thing I want to say here is you should always tell us who you are when you report it to us. If you then make it clear to us as the safeguarding team that you do not want your details to become known to anyone involved in the investigation, such as an alleged suspect or a child or a victim or witnesses, we would hold that information in confidence unless it was extremely high level and dangerous, and we would have to discuss a risk assessment process with that. But in the main, if you had a concern and you wanted to report to us, but you wanted to remain anonymous, report it to us, tell us who you are, but make it clear you would like to remain anonymous. Because if we then protect your identity, it may limit what we can do in an investigation, but it's far better for us to know who it is so we can engage with you and also look at, we can sometimes corroborate better if we know who's reporting it. The risk is if sometimes we see somebody would write a letter or put in a concern and just say, I'm anonymous, I'm not going to tell you who I am, please don't come back to me. When we're faced with that, it's extremely difficult because we've got no way of sense checking that unless we just run our own intelligence checks. And of course, we would still take a concern seriously if it was completely anonymous, but it would help us greatly if you told us who you were, but we can discuss protecting your identity from others.
Okay, so if it was a very personal situation in a club where perhaps, it was someone who you felt had quite a lot of power in the club or in the county or in the tournament system, then, you can still do that anonymously if you want to, but it's better to come directly to you guys than perhaps to go through welfare structures at local level.
Absolutely, Kay, because please don't, you've heard from our experience and our two case officers, for example, are both police officers as well, retired or left the service. And we are used to working in the professional capacity of protecting people's identities, assessing risk, etc. And so please don't think out there that we would just contact somebody and say, oh, so-and-so has just told us the following. We would protect identities. We work at a very high and discreet level.
Okay, well, that's really interesting. Thank you for explaining all of that to us. But I guess your roles don't, presumably don't just involve responding to investigations on safeguarding concerns. Perhaps it would help everyone to understand what else your team do, David, if that's...
Yeah, no problem. So I cover safeguarding and integrity. So our team covers safeguarding, anti-doping and anti-corruption, which is effectively match fixing. I'll focus on the safeguarding side. And as Greg mentioned there, we have a case team, like a reactive team of one case manager, Greg, and 2 case officers, and they investigate the reactive cases which come in. However, we are quite lucky in that we've got this proactive side. And I think we're one of the only sports who have such a function where we have 5 regional safeguarding officers led by the national safeguarding manager who actually go out and visit venues, and they carry out support visits with clubs, counties, and at competition. And some of you on the call may be aware of these, but in brief, these visits look at safeguarding at the relevant county venue or competition and just make sure that the measures that we expect to be in place to mitigate any risk are actually in place, and also to support volunteers who are obviously giving up their time and may not be as experienced at safeguarding and making their activity safe and making their venue safe. And actually the feedback from venues and counties and competitions on these has been pretty fantastic. So those visits include a survey of all the members, which comes directly to us. And we've carried out, I think, now over 2,500 of these across the country. So it's been a real success story in terms of raising the standards across the sport. Other areas we cover Scotland and Wales, who each have a safeguarding officer. We cover safeguarding at performance venues, who have an annual audit once a year for all national academies and regional player development centres. And if you have a child at any of those, you should receive an annual survey asking for your opinions, some of which will include safeguarding. And we also have, as Greg mentioned, a competitions action plan, which covers our work at competitions, which a lot of parents will obviously be engaged in, to try and raise safeguarding and standards at competition and improve kind of some of the behaviours that we see coming out of competitive sport. And then other things we do is around proactivity. So we've got our annual conference on the 5th of October. Everyone would be more than welcome to sign up to that on our safeguarding pages. And this year, we started running forums for wealth officers to join in and learn a bit more about safeguarding. So kind of a whole wealth of activity takes place.
No, that's a huge task, and I'm not surprised your team's as large as it is. And interesting that with the LTA shift of focus perhaps into more participation, and some of the roles at regional levels have disappeared or changed, morphed into other things. It's interesting that to know that safeguarding team is still as strong as ever. It's still at very top of the list in terms of what the LTA are prioritising, which is great. Well, perhaps we could take a deep dive into a few of those areas you touched upon now, and just go through a few things that parents would particularly be experiencing out there in the world of tennis that they, in the ecosystem they're in. Let's talk about tennis coaches, first of all, if that's okay. So what measures are in place to make sure our children are safe with the different levels of coaches? What sort of training do they undergo? And what should we as parents be checking for in order to be comfortable that our children are safe with coaches particularly?
Yep, no problem at all. Just on your previous point, actually, we actually set the safeguarding team, I should have mentioned, within Participation Directorate. So our director is in charge of participation teams and the regional teams you spoke of there. So actually it works very well, and we can actually kind of put our message out there a lot easier being on that directorate. So that's been really good. In terms of coaches, we're actually one of the only sports in the UK, and certainly the largest, who mandate that any coach operating at a level of 2 to 5 qualification out of an LTA registered venue, and most tennis venues in the UK will be registered with us. If you want to check, you can go to our website. They have to be accredited, which was a new name, relatively new, for the old licensing scheme, the coach licensing scheme. So this means that they must have received safeguarding training, which is a 3-hour facilitator-led course. They have to have a criminal record check approved by the LTA, and first aid course along with a relevant qualification. So that is your level 2 to 5. So generally the coach is operating on their own. And then there's clear deployment principles for level 1 coaching assistants and activators, which again mandate safeguarding training and criminal records checks. And we check this and make sure that this is in place for our support visit process and our annual venue registration process. So my advice to parents would be that kind of anyone who wants to assure themselves that a coach is LTA accredited and have those things in place should just go to our website, and we have something called a Find a Coach tool. So you can type that into Google, Find a Coach LTA, and you can type in the name of a coach and it will tell you their accreditation status and whether they're accredited to coach children and adults or one or the other. Now, if you don't find the name of the coach on there, then there is potential that they're not actually LTA accredited. So your best bet there is to just contact our customer support team or us for advice. So that's in terms of coaches, it's relatively straightforward for parents. We just say in the first instance, please make sure you're checking that they're accredited, because the types of case Greg's talking about there at the more serious end, one of the things we will do if we don't feel a coach is appropriate to work with children, we will remove their accreditation and right to work, and then they will come off that Find a Coach tool. So it's actually quite a useful tool for parents to use as a very quick cross-check in the first instance, but obviously isn't the whole package, and we always advise parents to do their own checks locally.
So you're saying that if a coach, because obviously there's these level qualifications that coaches can attain, just to sort of break it down into a bit more detail, and a level 1 coach is the first level, but it's not until level 2. Oh, and obviously a level 1 coach will be working under supervision generally. So it's the level 2 stage onwards, and we go up to 2, 3, 4, 5 at the top end, I think. So this difference between having those level qualifications and then having this accreditation or accreditation plus, as sometimes there's 2 types of accreditation, aren't there? And we've got to look at both of those, have we, in tandem?
Well, the qualification, if you look at it, try and put it quite simply, a qualification, it just means they've attended an LTA course and gained a qualification in coaching. It doesn't actually reflect in terms of their safeguarding or criminal records check or their background. The accreditation scheme is there really as a stamp kind of approval by the LTA, which then means we conduct additional checks. And as you mentioned, if you're an accredited plus coach, that means you keep your additional training up to date and things like that. But to keep it simple for parents, I think the key here is that you're checking that a coach is accredited. Some coaches who are not necessarily operating within our system will cite themselves as an LTA qualified coach. That does not mean they're accredited. So please do just tap the details into our system. And if you've got any concerns, just contact us through the safeguarding@lta.org.uk and we can advise you if we can.
Okay, and then there was this other level recently that came out. I think it was, my research says it was June 2022 when the Sexual Offences Act of 2003 was extended to include position of trust offences. Can you explain to parents what position of trust offences actually are?
Yeah, so this is interesting. So essentially, to keep this simple, is that children aged 16 or 17 by law can have sexual intercourse. However, if they are 16 or 17 years old and in a school, for example, and a teacher was to have sexual relations or intercourse or sexual activity with a 16 or 17-year-old, that's been illegal, and they would be arrested for that because they're seen as being in a position of trust over that child or a position of responsibility. Prior to the date you mentioned, this legislation did not include tennis coaches. So a tennis coach who had a sexual relationship with a 16 or 17-year-old would not be breaking the law. They would, of course, be breaking our LTA codes of conduct, which has always been very clear on this matter, that anyone under the age of 18 is a child, and that relationship would be a clear breach of the code of conduct. And of course, we would take action, but they would not be taken action against criminally. What we pushed along with a number of other sports with the Ministry of Justice was to extend that legislation that applied to teachers protecting children who are under their care in a school, and that also applies in other roles, into tennis coaching. So in short, it is now illegal for a tennis coach to have a sexual activity with a 16 or 17-year-old that they are coaching on a regular basis. And what that does is, although it doesn't change the action we take in relation to those cases, it does give us the strength and also a clear message to coaches criminally that this activity is also criminal and not just a code of conduct breach, which obviously helps us to put that message across to coaches.
Oh, that's really clear. Thank you for explaining that. And I think mostly tennis parents will be interacting through coaches. That'll be their primary connection. But can we perhaps move on now to venues to understand a bit more about that? So the places that we go to play tennis, and you mentioned LTA registered venues. Presumably that's a key thing to know. But what policies should be adopted, and what checks and measures are in place for venues, and how can tennis parents be sure that a tennis venue is compliant with those?
Do you like me to take this one, Greg?
Yeah, I think if you're happy with it, I think you're probably better knowledge across the venues.
Yeah, no
I know
problem.
I've got competitions.
Yeah, so moving on to tennis venues. So back in 2018, we introduced a set of standards that tennis venues we required them to adopt to become registered with the LTA. And just to understand what that means, most tennis clubs and venues in the UK are registered with us. What that means is they pay a small fee in order to access certain benefits, which includes access to the Wimbledon ballot for their members. It includes insurance at a discounted rate, as well as support from our team and other teams within the LTA. In 2018, we introduced a set of standards that venues had to meet, which included very basic things such as a safeguarding policy should be in place and displayed at the venue. There had to be a trained venue welfare officer at the venue who had safeguarding training and a criminal records check so that people could disclose to them. Relevant roles at the venue had to have criminal records checks through the LTA, so we knew who was operating and working out of venues. That didn't just extend to coaches, that extended to any role that would require it under the law. And on top of that, we introduced our safeguarding support visit process, which has a whole host of other requirements that we ask venues to meet. And I won't go through all of them, but you can find this information on our web pages. But essentially, we do a physical check of the environment, CCTV. We look at how they report concerns. We look if they've got posters around safeguarding up. We look at how they communicate safeguarding to members. And we speak to parents and coaches at the club, make sure the coaches are all accredited. We make sure parents know who the welfare officer is. And then we do that survey. And if there's any concerns come from that, such as the awareness of safeguarding in the venue is poor, then we place them on an action plan. And the ultimate sanction for the venue is that they can have their registration removed. And we've only had to do that a couple of times because generally venues do want to work with us. How can parents be sure that a tennis venue is compliant? Well, they probably wouldn't know in terms of the in-depth of the audit and the number of factors we look at. But what I would say is if you're a tennis parent and you're going into a venue and you can't see a safeguarding policy displayed, and if you were a child, or in fact you are a parent who is in there and looking around, you've got no idea who the welfare officer is, you can't see their name and contact details displayed, I would say that venue potentially isn't compliant, and you should speak to the LTA safeguarding team, because our regional safeguarding officers can then go in and try and make sure that those things are actually in place. You know, although we've done 2,500 visits, we can't get everywhere. There are a high number of registered venues, and we will try and get to them all, but we do rely actually and would love to see more people reporting these types of things to us where they're not seeing these things displayed, and then we can take action. Because ultimately the key thing for us is, if you're a child or someone in a club and there was abuse taking place, is it easy for you to work out who to report concern to? And if it's not, and if you're struggling and you can't see who that welfare officer is, then perhaps it's not, and there could be a risk there. So please do report that to us.
Well, what about a park venue? Obviously, some of the parks now have been refurbished and caged and have booking systems and are running under the councils, and the LTA funding, or at least the government funding through the LTA, has enabled us to do that in venues that aren't sort of traditional clubs. And also the sort of private venues like the David Lloyd's of this world and all other well-known brands. Is that the same? Do you treat those venues the same? Presumably some park courts are just going to be a little piece of old tennis court with a cage and nothing else.
Yeah, exactly the same. However, there are differences in how we apply the standards. So David Lloyd venues have to meet the standards exactly as any other venue would. We audit David Lloyd venues. We've done 12 audits of David Lloyd venues this year. So they have to meet the standards like any other club. And again, if you're not seeing those standards in a David Lloyd venue, please do let us know. Parks, again, if they're registered, they have to meet the standards. A lot of them are run by operators. So in that case, the welfare officer is slightly more difficult to find. If they're council run, the welfare officer might well be someone on the local authority, on the MASH team, for example. Where there is a park and it has the ability to display materials such as Safe to Play or a welfare officer poster, we expect them to be displayed. In some cases, they're just not able to, because of the types of issues you mentioned, a very small park, vandalism, those types of things. But in all cases of the new parks we set up, details of the welfare officer and safeguarding should appear on the booking pages or on their website. So they have to meet the standards. We audit parks and conduct support visits at parks just like any other venue. So the same principles apply. We just have to amend them slightly, given that they might not have, for example, a clubhouse, a coaching team, or a kind of committee.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. Before we move away from venues, I had a question from a parent who I think is on the call, actually, Brian. Their club are looking to start a junior social session. Could you advise what safeguarding measures should be put in place for that? And I think that ties in with another question that I had, which was to do with when should you stay with your child and when are you okay to leave them at a tennis venue?
Yeah. Just hopefully I'll remember all three of those points. I think actually just coming to the first piece or the last bit there, every event or competition should be making it clear in their guidance and their risk assessment around the age of supervision of children, of parents or guardians. However, as a general rule, we tend to look at under 13-year-olds should still be supervised by parents or children. That's a general rule, but I would urge anyone who's ever taken their children to an event or a competition to check if there are any different age limits at the venue or through the risk assessment through the official, which should be communicated at the time. You could also do other things as a parent if you're going there and you're maybe on the cusp of the age or you need to be away. It's always really important to engage with the official. We don't see this all the time. We sometimes get cases where an official says child's on their own and I can't get hold of the parent, because when they've booked on the competitions management system and when they've turned up at the event, they've not entered any contact details if there's any case of emergency. Equally, they may not have entered anything such as medical details should a referee or official need to know. So they're two things that we would really urge parents to do, is to not only check the ages, but we do talk as a general rule under 13 should be supervised, but check it with the guidance on the actual competition you're going to, but engage with the referee. Ensure when you book it that you put a contact detail. If you do have to go, or if there's an issue or time around age or timing, talk to the referee, give them details and check their understanding as well, so that at least there's no miscommunication about a child being left on their own. Touching on setting up an event, I know that you will be able to find this information in detail, just because I'm just mindful I don't want to eat into too much time, but you will be able to find this information in detail. I think it's on our events and competition guidance on our website under policies and guidance. But there's a few general things that I'd like to just quickly bullet point on that, if that's okay, that if you're looking to set up junior social sessions at a club, well, first of all, it would be a really good idea if there is a head coach there to have a chat with the head coach on their knowledge and understanding. Now, they may not be present for it, but what's their knowledge, because they do it as their business, around supervisory ratios, around age of supervision and guidance, because clubs have their, and that's part of our safeguarding standards check, is they should be clear on the supervision guidance on ages that children can or can't be left alone. So check in with your head coach around supervisory ratios and supervision guidance for ages. Any adults who are assisting on a regular basis, it's usually 3 times a month or more, but let's not complicate it and say on a regular basis, would be what we would call regulated activity. So even if they're just helping out as a volunteer with it on a regular basis, well, they should be getting a volunteer's DBS check. Emergency contact details for all children who are going to be there would be a really key one, because again, if you're there doing your best to organise an event and there's a bunch of children there of varying ages in a social session and one of them's taken ill and a parent isn't there, emergency contact details would be key. And you're probably going to guess the next bit I'm going to say, and that is also medical details as well. So in confidence with whoever's running it, asking parents if their child's going to be part of that group, to report in confidence to the person who's leading it if there are any medical issues that need to undertake to understand, just in case there's any emergencies, in a way to best deal. There's some general headlines there, but there will be a far more detailed document under the events and competitions guidance on our website. But definitely speak to head coach, because they probably know a lot of this already.
Thanks, Greg. And yes, you're right. The time is moving on fast, isn't it?
And I've got to talk about competitions now, haven't I?
Yeah,
So
if you could do that, then we've got some sort of more quick fire questions about different types of issues. But perhaps if you could just give us a broader brushstroke over competitions and what the LTA introduced to keep children safe when they're competing.
Absolutely. I'll do my best to keep this brief. Please move me along if I don't, because I don't want to do it a disservice. But look, competitions, we've identified for many years that this is a key priority for us, and it's been for many years one of the core strands on our strategy. Even though our team all deal with competitions and safeguarding strategy in close work with the competitions and officiating team, I do actually own the action plan, because I've got the benefit of seeing, as I said earlier, all concerns and working closely with our misconduct team as well. So I see so many concerns that are related to competitions that I've got that in-depth knowledge. So that's why I lead on the action plan. Now, we've made significant gains in this area, but please don't think we're being flippant about that, because it's still, we're not resting on our laurels there, and there are still areas that we need to and want to improve on. But it's all about identifying that we want to make events and competitions safer. And so it's raising the awareness for officials as to how to manage an event and be safe, and how to respond to any issues, but also sending a clear message to parents who are acting inappropriately that it's not acceptable, and dealing with them, but to those parents who aren't, that it's a safe event to go to. So I'm going to bullet point a number of things we've done, and then just tell you how we measure that. I think that would be the best way to do it. Since the inception of the action plan, since the beginning of January 22, we have introduced a wider scope of cases that we would deal with under the threshold of a competition involving children, and I'll come to that a bit later if that's okay. But we have ensured that we deliver both case conference studies and safeguarding input at all conferences for officials, for not just our own annual conference, but all ABTO and officials conferences as well. You've heard me say that on a monthly basis, I'm checking the action plan progress with the managers and the head of competitions, and Dave as well. We've increased and made a consistent uniformity around information displays at events that officials have to display, briefings they have to give that include safeguarding. There's a guide on what they should be mentioning. We've just created an information video for all, and that's going to be not only live on our resources section of our conference, but is going on the website as well. That is actually a walk around video where we've gone to a good venue and identified things such as key displays at the venue, displays by the official, briefings, what the common areas are, and we've even used a YPWA, a young person, to talk about the good and bad things about competitions. So it's really around enhancing everybody's knowledge, not just officials. We've also enhanced the links on the competition management system, the CMS, where there are direct links to our own web page. And now if you go on that direct link, as you click it, there is a training package that can be done online for parents, not just about safeguarding, but about the holistic competitions, but safeguarding and keeping your children safe. There are dedicated areas for coaches and officials, for parents and for juniors, just to name a few. And we've also enhanced officials licensing scheme, officials training. We have brought in a whole host of things, and all of this has been under the watch of the D tag for both safeguarding and competitions to sort of be our critical friend on what we're doing. Now, how do we measure that? We measure that, one, by the cases that I see. We see an increase on cases, and we would expect to. Please don't ever think an increase on safeguarding reports means that abuse is going up. It's not. It means it's always been there. It's there in society. We have to accept that. But it means that it's not going unnoticed, and it's being reported, and that means we can intervene earlier and take strong action. And also, we have our regional safeguarding officers, and we're trying to broaden the scope to county organisations as well, to go out to competitions and use a dynamic automated checklist to make sure that they're achieving all the standards, very similar to venue standards. And we look at thematic changes on that and giving feedback. So there's an awful lot that we've done, but we're still doing more because it's an area that we want to get to absolute perfection.
Thank you. And can I just quickly run you babackwards a moment and check a couple of acronyms there? There was DTAG, which I know, but could you just do that one for us?
Yeah, sorry. Do you know, in a minute, Dave or maybe Julia might tell us what DTAG stands for. I'm terrible with that, but basically, there's a number of DTAG, and they are they're independent groups set up of counsellors to cover key areas. I think Julia mentioned volunteers. We've got competitions, we've got safeguarding. There's a host of them, and Dave will know them all. And they basically are our critical friend and holding us to account, but supporting us as well as to what we're doing and how we're going to improve. So I don't know, Dave, I don't know if you wanted to explain that.
Development Tennis Advisory Group.
Thank you. I've been to many. I just always forget my own acronyms. Sorry.
And also that word counsellor, and just to explain that that's the person who represents each county on a council of advisory group that report into the president of the LTA, who's also, these are all volunteers, and they have a say in these DTAG groups in terms of how things, and there is one specifically for safeguarding. And then the other one that you used was WPWA, and probably a good time then to explain. Why
YPWA? Yeah, so that's our Young People Welfare Ambassadors. That's a terrific piece of work that's come in the last couple of years, led by the team, and with Hannah Knox, one of our safeguarding officers, driving that. We could talk all night about the awards they've been put up for and the recognition, and they are our young people who are absolutely outstanding. They're a small cohesion of ambassadors around the age of 12 or 13 up to 19, 20. They can be young people as well as children, who have been working with us both operationally but strategically around our clear messaging and things like competitions, or how do we work on our themes of cases and concerns and deliver proactive messaging to parents or children or coaches to ensure prevention piece of safeguarding works. They're there as our advisors on how it's best delivered for children. So one of the key strands, back to my 6 Ps earlier, we sometimes don't listen to the voice of the child enough, and participation is key. Now, yes, it's important we listen to children when it's operational, where there's allegations being made, but it's really key to bring in our young person's welfare ambassadors for the strategic piece as well, to look at how we're driving messaging for young people going forwards. And that's only going to expand more to more and more venues.
I was just about to ask, is that something that you imagine every club might have in the future? Is that sort of the vision for the young person welfare ambassador? And how does a parent get involved in that if their child would like to be a part of that? Who's the person to go to?
Dave, would you be stronger on that?
Yeah, that's fine.
I didn't want to say the wrong thing.
So the scheme was piloted with 25 last year, and the results were so successful in terms of the awareness of welfare officers amongst young people at venues. It rose by double digits in terms of percentage on a survey we did before they came into post and then after. That we're now launching the scheme more widely on the 1st of October. So we're looking, actually, if you are a parent and you've got a young person who you think might be interested, and the kind of benefits that we see are, it can count towards their Duke of Edinburgh award. It could be really good for their CV of a young person for university or for a job. And they want to get involved in trying to make their club or their county a safer place. Then you can sign up via our web pages from the 1st of October, and we'd welcome applications. Like you say, there is no limit ultimately to the number we want to have across the country. So the more the merrier.
Okay. Yes,
thanks, Dave. Kay, could I just give a 30-second thing? Because I'm aware that something you did ask me before, that just in case we ran out of time, I know somebody was keen to know about, although it may not directly be safeguarding, about the best routine for food and exercise to keep their child or player strong and healthy. That's something that is very strong within our performance network. So there isn't something that's a broad range across all tennis, but we did speak to our anti-doping and officer who's got some knowledge in nutrition as well. And there's 2 key things I wanted to say to that. You'll understand why I just jumped in on that. The first one is the advice is always to maintain a healthy eating, not just relying on supplements. But one of our YPWAs, our young person's ambassadors, called Ella, has actually posted a sort of very young modern thing, her sort of journal of her life on training on our website, and it's under the health and well-being site section of our webpage on safeguarding. And she actually goes through what her routine is, which includes training and nutrition. So that would be something that could be really helpful for parents to hear it from a young person, and for the children to hear it themselves as well from a peer, rather than us just front loading a presentation on it.
No, great moment to mention that. Thank you, Greg. That was a question definitely from a parent. And I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball, because this question came in quite late, but I do think it's an important one. This parent was talking about when a parent gets banned from accompanying children on overnight trips, even as young as 9 or 10, for example, into regional camps or GB friendlies. So while we're on the subject of competition, there are times when either coaches in regional settings or in national settings or even in international settings are taking children away to compete. And the parents said they do understand that the presence of a parent perhaps for the event is unnecessary, but they feel a bit uncomfortable about an overnight stay without a parent present. And they feel also that saying no might mean that their child could be missed out next time, because they're sort of regarded as uncooperative parents, and their child might be overlooked in the future. How does that sit with you in safeguarding?
So I'll just answer a bit of that, but I didn't make sure I understood the first part as well. Did you say about parent being banned from overnight
Yes,
trips?
I think there's when there's interregional camps and GB friendly, sometimes the LTA would advise that it wasn't appropriate for the parents to accompany, and that it was part of the development of the child to go away with the coaches,
Right.
to have that experience without parental support.
Right. Sorry, I just wanted to be clear that we weren't talking about someone who's actually been given a suspension by us, who's not allowed to be in tennis activities.
Oh, no, sorry. Yes.
If that's the term. Yeah, no, I just thought a bit of a, yeah, I mean, there's probably a well-being and side of things that you would want to be there for your child and nurture them. But if the setting is that, whether it's international or an overnight camp, that it isn't for parents to be there, we would expect that whether it's the performance team or the coaches that follow the international trips guidance that's available, which would make sure, and they do go very deep into the expectation of what they should be doing, and it's around, and there is guidance on this around the supervisory ratios, the number of coaches, the gender balance on coaches, where children stay, whether it's in a hotel room, and then there's very clear guidance on, and we're delivering this on our competitions brief on the conference actually, Kay, but there's clear guidance on what circumstances children can stay in rooms together of ages. They shouldn't be with an adult unless it's an 18-year-old child, someone who's just turned from child to an adult and they're a friend of the other one. They should be of the same gender. They should be on the same floor of the coaches who should be doing a check on them. But an awful lot of the events that are run with counties, for example, and I'm not sure about the performance ones on a national scale, but they also bring some parent volunteers as well, who have to be DBS checked as well, so that there is a bit of pastoral as well. But I don't really want to give a personal opinion in there, because I do appreciate it's a very tough one, because if the expectation is that the children are traveling with coaches as a performance setup, I know some very proactive and caring parents would want to be part of that. But if it's not part of the setup, unless there's a reason not to trust it, there is some very strict and clear guidelines in place that around what coaches should be doing or counties should be doing around supporting those children on the trips. And they are never done in isolation. They're actually, all of these policies and guidance that are written, whether it's performance team or counties, they've always been done in consultation with our safeguarding team as well.
Okay, thank you. And you know, as you say, we could talk all night, to be quite frank. There's so many different aspects of this. Yeah. But let's try and get through some more questions in say the next 10 minutes or so. I think that's a reasonable time frame to aim for, if that's okay with you guys.
Absolutely.
Okay, so first of all, really quickly, anything different for parents based in Scotland and Wales on these things we've discussed so far?
No, only one very small thing. Dave's obviously mentioned that even though Tennis Scotland and Tennis Wales are their own organisations, we work extremely closely with them. There is a Tennis Wales safeguarding officer and a Tennis Scotland safeguarding officer, similar to our England regional safeguarding officers. Any cases or concerns are supervised by me, and I have regular meetings with them, for example, around it. And they are part of all of our safeguarding meetings where we're looking at conferences and strategies, for example. So we're a very close team. The only one small difference that I'd say, of course, there are I always struggle with this word, legislative differences with statutory agencies. So, for example, Children's Services or a LADO, a local authority designated officer, doesn't exist in Scotland, but it does in England. But you don't need to worry about that. You just need to know if there's a concern, you still report it through to us, because we would then engage with Scotland and Wales safeguarding officers. But the one small difference is in Scotland, a child is actually under 16, not under 18. So in England and Wales, a child by definition is anyone under the age of 18, regardless of their position or whether they work or in armed forces. In Scotland, a child is actually under the age of 16 unless they're receiving care and support, which could take it up to the age of 18. So it's a small nuance, but we still look within the sport as anyone under 18 should be protected, regardless of whether it's Scotland or England and Wales.
I always think it's quite interesting when children go off to America on a scholarship and find out that they're still children after all, when they've already been sort of working in bars in England, and then they find they can't buy a beer in America. So yeah, it's also good to know the differences. Another quick question: just sort of bullying player on player or child on child, does that come under safeguarding?
Yeah, it does, Kate, and those of you who are listening, and this, I don't want to cause any concern, but this is an area we do see happening more and more, and very much around social media. Sadly, we see an awful lot of social media use, and sometimes not necessarily bullying, but inappropriate messaging between peers or child on child. We look at these cases and we look at whether there is we are restricted as to whether there is the prohibited conduct of a risk to a child, which predominantly is a lot easier to prove if it's an adult with a power imbalance. So sometimes when it's child on child, if we struggle with proving prohibited conduct, then our partner team, the disciplinary team, would look at whether there's a code of conduct breach, but it should always be reported to us first so that we can assess it. And what I would add to that is, if any of you out there work in education, you'll know about Keeping Children Safe in Education government guidance. And that has been really strong for the last 2 years and had a key update last year around child on child bullying and online social media bullying as well. But I must say that even though we look into the cases, we do run in keeping with the Keeping Children Safe guidance, that we tend not to see that a sanction or an official outcome is necessarily the best course of action, unless it's really serious or a repeat offender, or particularly a bad effect on the victim, the child. We usually look at learning and preventative measures as it does with Keeping Children Safe in Education as well. But yes, absolutely report to us.
And you mentioned that word social media there, so perhaps we could talk a little bit about that. What are the rules around using children's images in publicity and on social media? What's okay and what's not okay, especially now that some parents have supervised tennis journey Instagram accounts for their children? What's the sort of learnings that you've had in this space?
Yeah, I'm going to be really quick on this because Dave might want to jump in as well, because we both have different experiences with this as well. But we get a lot of reports to us about people saying somebody has posted an image of my child with a name on there and I didn't give them consent. Sometimes we're then challenged, because then when we look around that child themselves has got their own social media account and they fully name themselves, and I'm not judging this whatsoever with ages, because there's no legal age. It's more of a moral choice by parents and the children. But some parents are allowing very young children to post their profile and their age so they can have lots of followers. I just exercise some caution with this. The general rule of thumb with our guidance is that you shouldn't really, when you're talking children, and now of course that's under 18, but of course when we're getting to older, to 17, 18, 16, 17, 18, we may be able to be a little bit more relaxed as parents around that. But as a general rule, if you've got relatively young children and they are putting, I would say if they're primary school age, you shouldn't really have a profile on there. I'm a bit old fashioned. You've heard me say that when I grew up was in the 70s. I think children are accessing social media too young, but personally, because there's great stuff with it, but there are also inherent risks. So primary school age, I would advise against, but if you do have children who are posting their own social media account, just don't put any information on there that could personally identify them, such as a full name or where they reside or close to where they live, things that could solely identify them and make it easier for someone, if they were that way minded, to identify exactly who they were and to locate them. So I don't want to cause hysteria with that, but equally, I think you've just got to be a bit cautious about try not to be too open and share too much information about your child to people, especially names, especially identifiers. I don't know if Dave, I don't know if you're happy with that, or if there was anything else you wanted to know.
No, and just make sure that when pictures are being taken, that the consent's been obtained from you as a parent, and that you actually, that consent, you understand that consent fully in terms of what is going to happen to that image, where it's going to be stored, and how it will be used, and where it'll be distributed, so that you can actually have informed consent and know exactly what's going to happen to that image of your child and where it might go.
Okay, great. I think that's covered that one. It's interesting. We're talking really about best practice, and it's kind of up to the parent at the end of the day, up to the child to some extent. But some good advice there. What about communicating with coaches and team captains using text messaging and WhatsApp? How do you sit with that? Is that something best practice, or is that a complete no-no?
No, that's a nice simple one for us here. Is that under 18 can communicate with coaches or team captains by text or WhatsApp. However, their parent or guardian should also be on that group chat. So in other words, there should not be one-to-one individual messaging between a coach or anyone in a position of trust with someone under the age of 18. And we are very strong on that. The reason being is twofold, really. One, we have to protect coaches as well, around the risk of people's perception if they're privately messaging children, even if it's not with a negative intent, a criminal intent, even if it's just good practice for them, but poor practice for us. But equally, the whole purpose of our Safe to Play campaign uses this as an example. I'm sorry to say, but it's life that there are predators out there. We look at what's something called the Finkelhor model. And if anyone's interested and they don't know what it is, have a look on the website. It's a really simple 4-step process called the Finkelhor model. And it talks about people who have a motivation to abuse children, how they take that motivation beyond their private life and then find roles where they can use that to abuse their position. And once they get themselves comfortable in that position, overcoming the victim and abusing the child is the easy part. So we don't want to give that easy opportunity for anyone who is potentially a predator to have one-to-one contact with a child. So absolutely fine. Individual texting, I'd say absolutely not. Fine to be on a WhatsApp group, but be on there as the parent as well, because what you can't rule out is they could go off into private chats as well.
Okay, and moving swiftly then on from the sort of virtual world to the actual physical world, when is it okay for a coach to actually touch a child? Because sometimes when they're explaining something technical, perhaps they need to actually touch the child, or even just sort of taking a photograph. I've seen a lot of county cut teams with coaches with their arms around the children. Is that something that's okay, not okay? Are we being overprotective, or?
Yeah, I really like that last bit, the way you just described that, Kay. Is sometimes the consequence of proactive safeguarding is people can become a little bit too oversensitive sometimes. And we've had scenarios in the past, not just in tennis, but in scouting, where a child has been injured and someone responsible has said, I can't give them first aid because I can't touch them, because they're just too scared to do it. Well, look, we've got to have a degree of proportionality to this. Abuse can take part in many forms, not just physical abuse. So the thing I need to be clear on, there's not a definitive list of what isn't and is okay when it comes to contact with children. But we tend to use the term in our codes of conduct around absolutely necessary or necessary for the role. So if you just apply that logic, if there is a child who's extremely upset and needs consoling, or a child who's injured and needs first aid, or if you need to explain a grip or a stance in the sport, I won't, my knowledge of tennis is poor, so I won't go into more detail than that, but you might find it's necessary just to help guide the hand, for example. So it's what's absolutely necessary. And so as a parent, if you see physical contact, I think it comes back to that gut feeling. Does it seem right? If you've got a coach who on one occasion is everyone's coming together for a photograph and arms out ride, then you may feel there's absolutely nothing to be concerned about with that, as we probably wouldn't as well. However, if it's happening every time and then the coach is having individual photos and then putting comments about one of the children on social media, there might be information that builds, that leads your gut feeling to grow, that would lead you to check with us. Because remember, if you're unsure, always report it and let us decide and assess whether we feel there's a risk or not. But it is very hard because we don't want to diminish the great coaching that's out there, because it's always a small number that are the wrong people. And so we need to have that degree of common sense as well. So always just follow your gut on it. And if it's absolutely necessary for the role or for the role that the coach is doing, then we would say as a general rule of thumb, that's acceptable.
Greg, you've talked a few times tonight about gut feels, and our final question really, just rolling a couple of thoughts in together here, is about where we perhaps wouldn't have a gut feel, because perhaps it's a generational thing. We don't know what these new ways of contacting children, what sort of risks are out there. We live in a bit of a bubble perhaps, and we've never had any personal experience of that ourselves, and we don't know what signs to look out for in our children. Have you got any advice for parents listening about what sort of red flags there might be in terms of behavior of a child, or in terms of what they're involved in? What are the latest dangers that perhaps we are not aware of?
Yeah, really good question. I touch on this in a lot of training that I deliver around our values are based on a whole host of factors. So everybody is a subjective test, and everyone has different thresholds. What one person thinks acceptable, the other may not. And that's what makes it so difficult. But that's why we keep that consistent message of, if you're unsure, then just report it to us. We do get a lot of people question, just won't even report it as an actual concern, but will just email us and say, is this right? I mean, some of the topical things that I would say is young person on young person at the moment, a lot of alleged bullying or social media issues. But inappropriate messaging is still something that happens an awful lot. Now, that doesn't mean to say it's inappropriate for means of sexual gratification all the way further down the line, but inappropriate messaging either in person or online or social media between people in position of trust for children and young people as well. It's really hard to say, because we all have different moral compasses, but I think if you are just a parent or a volunteer or anyone within tennis, and what we are doing is trying to absolutely promote the openness, you might find that you may not see something yourself because you may have a slightly higher threshold from how you've grown up in life, but it's promoting the openness to all, and that other people, not just those people who are potential victims of abuse, young people and children, but witnesses or people who work within the sport or volunteer, also feel that they can report and be open about it because they've got no fear of any reprisals. So it's just about encouraging that openness and no taboo around the subject. Does that answer?
Yeah, and presumably you can pass that message on to your children as well, to say that it's okay, that there's an opportunity for them to share any concerns that they have, anything that's bothering them, if their behavior changes perhaps, and you want to understand perhaps what they're going through, just to try. It's always difficult with teenagers, isn't it? And maybe they won't come to their own parent, they might go to a teacher or a coach, and maybe just making sure that parents have a sense of open lines of communication with their children, and that nothing is a bad thing to discuss.
That's an absolutely great description from yourself there, Kay. I mean, if you think a lot of people are scared to talk to children about this subject because they feel that it's oversensitive. Children are very strong, resilient young people. And if you look at primary schools, I'm sure there'll be people with better knowledge than me, but in primary schools, they are looking at sensitive ways of preparing children for signs of domestic abuse, for example, and things, so at an early age. So it is, when we talk to young people in our sport, but also across the Children's Society and other charities, children are telling us that they want to be listened to, they want to be treated as a grown-up as such, but taken seriously, and they want to be able to share a concern and be taken seriously and not judged. So it is about explaining to your child, if you're a parent, and talking to them early. Do you know, you don't have to say, do you know what a predator is, or safeguarding, or the Finkelholm model as I talked about, but you could just say to your child, even at a young age, if you had a concern about anything, do you know who you'd talk to? You can talk to mum and dad or mum, but do you know who to talk to at a club? Who would you go to? You can just talk about open dialogue and supporting and making it seem so simple that all they've got to do is share. So really good description there, Kate.
And I think that key thing is not to be judged, and equally not to be, we talk about on the group, people can post anonymously, and they worry about perhaps if they didn't post anonymously that they would be judged as adults. Even in the world of tennis, it's a small world, it's a small community, and perhaps even letting children know that they won't be ostracized by the coaches or the counties or whoever for speaking up.
Absolutely. And in fact, if I may, just 2 quick sentences. There was one really reinforcing something that Dave said earlier. People need to be vigilant. Let's not get over sensitive or concerned. I don't want anyone to think, oh my God, there's lots of safeguarding issues. I don't trust anyone. I can't trust my children with anyone. We are talking about minorities. And the great thing is we've got such an open dialogue that people are reporting so many things so early that intervention becomes key. So don't mistrust everyone. You've heard from Dave that there's a find a coach tool, so you can quality check if a coach is someone who you could use. There should be a welfare officer at a venue, and you can just observe and be satisfied. And if you've got any doubts, you know who you can ask. And the other one, which is just a little nugget that's just added into tennis, is serious case reviews when children are harmed or die in matters outside of tennis and charities and public sector. Something that comes up time and time again is people focus too much on the individual. They're looking for a dangerous individual. So if that person doesn't fit that profile or model of a dangerous individual, they let behaviors go. All you need to do is focus on the behaviors. And if you as a parent see a behavior that you don't think is right, don't think, oh, but that's a great coach or that's a good volunteer. They wouldn't do that. They're always if the behavior is wrong, report it. Focus on the behavior, not the individual.
Well, that's fantastic advice, and I don't know whether you wanted to add anything, David. I just want to say from the tennis parents community, really, and on behalf of us, thank you for tonight. Thank you also for what you're doing, because we all live in this community of tennis, and it does sound like the work you've done has led it to be a safer place. And I don't think we can stop there being predators in the world, but maybe we can stop them from coming into our sport so easily and make us feel a bit more comfortable that our sport is a safe place for all of us to be in. So we really appreciate the changes that have happened at the LTA and what you guys have done to produce that, and really just a heartfelt thanks for that.
No, thank you for inviting us. And there's been a lot of work done, but there's always more to do. So we do rely on parents and the tennis community in telling us what's happening on the ground. So if you do see something, as Greg said, then please just do report it to us, and we'll be there to support you. So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you both very much. And I haven't got any questions in the chat. There are some nice thank you messages coming in there. But thank you very much once again, and good night to everybody for now.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.